Hello and welcome to Table Talk. I'm Rich Mackey, publisher of the Star Herald, and this week on our version of Table Talk is Senator John Stinner. Senator, thank you very much for joining us today. We should be a good bunch of questions that we can answer and have some fun with and inform some people.
Very good.
All right. You've been representing District 48 in the Nebraska legislature since 2014. Tell us what drove you to run for state legislature and what you like representing the district.
Well, one of the things in my past has been I served on the Gering School Board for a 10-year period of time, but also as a community banker over the 25 years that I've been here, or 30 years now that I've been here. Been involved highly in the community. Because of term limits, John Harm's term was up. We did look around, we meaning some citizens looked around for a candidate. I was actually chairman of the Nebraska Bankers Association, so I dealt with the Dodd-Frank bill. Dodd-Frank was legislation that really came out of the housing crisis. So I spent some time in Washington, D.C., I spent some time with the state legislature, and I got familiar with what the process was. I could see that you actually can affect some changes. You need to know your facts, you need to present them. And that was some of the reasons I love this community. I wanted to give back to not only District 48, but the Panhandle.
Right.
And when you look at the state, there's only 4, 5, 6 of us actually for half the state. So it's an important function. This is important business that we're doing. So that was some of the compelling factors.
Your comments kind of lead into the next two questions. You were reelected to the legislature last year, and this is your second and last term.
Yes.
How do you feel about term limits?
Should be another term, and I think I'll give you an example of an extreme case is the example that 18 of us came in brand new when I came into the legislature. Now there's 49 members of the legislature. 19 ended up coming in back of us. So you had over 70% of the legislature with 2 years of experience or less. Mm-hmm. So people like myself, I had to step up and become chairman of appropriations. That's a big committee. We had a 2-year person step up as head of education, 2-year person step up as HHS chairman, 2-year person step up on judiciary. All big committees, all really steeped with a lot of background information that you need to have. So a lot of us had to step up and fulfill those roles. But in the legislature, knowledge is power. And so when you are that young, and it really kind of goes back to what the lobbyist can give you as information, plus what your staff has, that institutional memory that you need to have. If you don't have that, obviously then you start to give up power to the executive side who does have that information. So
Gotcha.
So I would extend it for another 4 years, 12 years. Interestingly, before they passed this term limits, the average was 8 years anyway.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
This was obviously pointed legislation in Ernie Chambers.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are talking about it.
Yes.
And it also comes to the next point where Speaker Jim Scheer recently spoke about the proposal to expand the legislature from 49 to 55. What are your thoughts about that?
He and I had a conversation about that, I believe last session, and we were trying to figure out how we can best represent our constituents in the state of Nebraska. And what would happen in today's 49 configuration would probably lose a senator or two in western Nebraska. We need representation here. The other thing is I think you could become a better representative if you're actually if you have less people that you are accountable to, so that you can get closer to your constituents.
Right. Gotcha.
So there's two big benefits I see, and one of them is this redistricting could cost us at least one, maybe two.
Yeah.
And certainly a reconfiguration of senators in rural, because I believe Omaha is going to pick up 2 and 1 in Lincoln.
Well, that kind of goes along with the mindset that some of the districts have become so large that it's difficult for senators to actually get out there and be able to visit with the citizens. And so with a change like this, does it help? Does it not? I really don't know, especially if you're gonna be losing people on the western half.
Yes.
So that would make it even more difficult, I would think.
Yeah, and landmass wise, the state of Nebraska is fairly diverse. I think if you look at just western Nebraska, as you move east, you pick up every 30 or 40 miles, you pick up another inch of moisture. Well,
Yeah.
that changes the cropping situation.
Absolutely.
When I stand up in the legislature and talk about water and water issues, for an example, a lot of people don't understand what water means to the western part of the state. So that would just be one example, plus the differences in cropping. We've got dry edible beans and sugar beets, and
Yeah.
obviously we had a canal break, and now I've got a tunnel situation, which I've got to explain to the rest of the rest of the body about how this all works.
Yeah, because over there, they're not necessarily worried about how this is being handled over here.
Right, and they've got to remember the North Platte starts at Hardin.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. So how do you think the budget picture for this state has improved during your time in the legislature?
Well, my first year, I think we passed a budget spend of 3.6%. The next year we had $1.2 billion in revenue shortfall when I took over as chairman. And I can tell you that trying to fit all the parts together, trying to be fair and balanced in our approach and still get a balanced budget out was difficult. We used up, and when I talk about draining the swamp, we used up a lot of cash reserves that we had in various agencies, build up cash over a period of time. I took $250 million out of that. We spent down the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
We left sine die this time with $322 million. If 500 is the minimum reserve, which I talk about a lot on the floor, we're a ways away from that. Now, the budget has improved since that time. We passed a budget this time actually lower than the governor's for, I think, the first time in history that the legislature actually was lower than the governor, not by much. We kind of matched up.
Yeah.
We did have some other priorities than the governor at that time, plus, the flood happened, so we had to make some adjustments there.
Yeah.
So we, over the 3 budgets that I've been involved in, we passed the spends of 2.4%. This 3% actually would have been about a 2.5 because we had a Medicaid expansion in there for about 0.5% of the budget. Still not a full amount for Medicaid expansion because it's going to start in October, but we're incurring expenses associated with that. So we've been pretty austere.
Yeah.
And that compares to the average, 30-year average of 4.2%. When I started with the legislature, I talked about 2 and 3% budgets. A lot of people scoffed at us, but we've been holding the line on expenditures, which gave us the opportunity, even though we were flat in revenue and negative in revenue in some cases, to add to the property tax relief fund. And that's been a #1 priority. I think when people look back over or at least when I look back over my shoulder, people say we haven't done anything in the legislature. Well, we went from $115 million when I entered the legislature now to $275 million in property tax. We're anticipating putting another 100 in there. When I started with the legislature, I felt $1 billion was our target to try to rebalance the legs on the stool. So we're 37.5% probably if we can get that done this year. We have done something on that.
Yeah.
And it's incremental, I get that, and you don't feel it. Ag in that formula is actually given an extra 20% as far as their allocation. So we've been trying to be fair with all the constituents as it relates to property tax, residential, commercial, as well as ag. But ag does get more of those dollars.
Property tax issues, just like you mentioned, are at the top of everybody's mind, especially right
top
now.
Of our minds.
Yeah, absolutely it is, absolutely. So, and it seems to be the #1 in the state for a lot of folks. What do you expect will be done during the upcoming session?
Yeah, and actually I've had conversations with the governor. I've had a couple conversations with the revenue chair. They are actually working on about $100 million package, which was the amount of money. I think we were $125 million is what we had room for. In this session, we'll use $100 million of that is the proposal. Mm-hmm. Whether that goes for property tax relief as it relates to the fund, or if the revenue department or the revenue committee comes up with a new idea.
Yeah.
as to making those $100 work more effectively. That will have to be debated out and see. That's my number one issue when I go back, and actually I'll go back early to sit down with the governor and the revenue committee and try to figure out what we can do. And then I think they're also trying to look at the next 2 years of the biennium, which hasn't been passed. We call those the out years.
Yeah.
What is available there? Right now it's 400 million's available. We'll use up 200 million because I believe this 100 million that we're putting in is sustainable.
Right.
So what we can do with that little bit of extra, if it's available, we'll go for property tax. So.
Now, this next session coming up that you just spoke about that you're going to go early to is pretty short.
Yeah.
It's a short one, like 60 days. So do you think it's possible to be able to effectively address that with property tax and get something done within that time frame?
Well, it's going to be interesting. Two things will come up and really take most of the time in the legislature, two important issues. One's property tax, obviously, and I don't know how that's going to be structured because I know the governor's going to put his request within his budget. His budget doesn't arrive till, I think 14th or 15th of January, so we've started already on some of the debates. We'll see what he puts in it. I don't know if he's going to line item, if he's going to put in a property tax relief or some other mechanism he's going to use. What the revenue committee comes up with will have to be debated, so that will take some time.
Right.
But 720 also is the incentive package that expires.
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska Advantage Act expires. Obviously, this is an important part of it, and I've signed on to that, and I've been one of the proponents of it. I've been spoke about it on the floor. I actually have an amendment that was put in basically for budgetary controls, and 125 million will have some kind of look in. Hopefully, those two things seem to be combined, especially with the speaker and some of the rural senators.
Mm-hmm.
Property tax relief is right along with incentive programs.
Yeah.
What would help our growth in Nebraska is some kind of relief on property tax.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's a lot of concern also going around about nursing home struggles and their financial, the closures. What do you see?
That's been one of my major issues.
Yeah.
We actually did put additional dollars in there. We tried to close the gap. We were about $36 short in breaking even on the Medicaid side of things. And if you watch the pattern, especially in rural Nebraska, more and more people are showing up that qualify for Medicaid. So as you pass that threshold of 50%, 60% Medicaid patients, you can imagine what that loss in dollars is associated with. So what we tried to do this session was to allocate additional dollars to it. That was one of my priorities. Take the 7.2 million that had been allocated for the last 4 years and try to push that out as well. And I understand that's going to be an issue of mine when I go back, because that 7.2 didn't necessarily get pushed out.
Gotcha.
Those are dollars that are matched by the federal government. So in essence, we sent out about 22 to 23 million dollars. If there's 2.2 million Medicaid days, that should have closed the gap by $10.
Gotcha.
So we're trying to close that gap. We can't close it right away.
Yeah.
But it's a high priority with me, and the nursing homes are vital industries within our small towns. They're vital for the people who live there. And I always get that we have excess capacity in the nursing homes,
Right.
especially in rural Nebraska. Well, that nursing home that's scheduled to have 80 patients that has 50, it's just as important.
Yeah.
It's critical
Yeah.
to that community. So
Absolutely.
I'm still pushing it, and I'll continue to push it.
And that's good, because that is a tough one for a lot of people and a concern for a lot of folks.
Absolutely.
I'm going to turn the corner on something a little bit different here that I know you're a supporter of, and I've recently written a column about it, but it's the hemp bill.
Right.
Okay? You are a huge supporter of that, especially in this area. See if we can kind of start getting some of that revenue going and
Yes.
back into the district. But you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually, it was a heck of a fight to get it out. We had the Attorney General, the governor, and that's how it started out against this bill because it was so closely associated with CBD oils and all the rest of that stuff. But once we had the opportunity to visit with them, we were able to kind of push that through. I had to find a couple extra funds in order to get it funded, so we sat in a meeting and I basically said these are funds that are available that you can use. We've moved ahead, we meaning the Department of Agriculture has made an application to the USDA, and I think that it supports 270 or so licenses. This is just all brand new stuff, so I haven't had a chance to really dig in and take a look at it.
And moving pretty fast.
I will say this, that based on what I see in the hemp side of things, it fits what we do here in western Nebraska as an alternative crop. We'll see how it goes. There's multiple uses of hemp. It's actually an old crop.
Yeah. It's one of the very first.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are safeguards around it. I think the people who are concerned about it need to understand that there's testing that goes on, in the field testing. Some of the hemp products that actually were grown this year were damaged and had to be were over the limit, let's put it that way, and had to be destroyed. So there are protections. There's a little bit of a problem right now, or a challenge in the legislation as it relates to law enforcement. As you transport hemp down the road, how do we test to see if it's hemp or if it's something else?
Right.
And so there's some challenges there. I think the university's working on some of those things. We had a fairly robust meeting. Locally, we did it telephonically with all the folks that were involved in this, meaning law enforcement, along with the Department of Ag, along with the University of Nebraska, all were present. So we had a pretty good meeting. We're going to have some follow-ups with that. Certainly the governor's office was involved. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
It's the banking issue, I think, is getting straightened out, and the SAFE Act was just passed. It has to be signed by the governor, or by the president, excuse me. So lots of things happening very quickly, so we'll see how it all comes together.
What do you think of the thought process that with the area in which we live in, you have a lot of crops that, of course, they're outside, and this past year has been damaging to a lot of them for weather's sake, and also the water issues that we've had. If we had a different kind of a crop such as hemp, could that help to offset a lot of that loss? Could it become large enough to offset that and help rebound? I don't know, just a question.
Well, I think we have to find our niche.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a multitude of uses for hemp. We find our niche, make sure that it's profitable. It's an alternative to what we're trying to get done here. What we're trying to get done here too is water conservation.
Yeah.
So this may fit into the water conservation idea as well.
I know China is is the top country in the world as an exporter of hemp. I know that I think the United States is probably third or fourth, something like that. But with the push across the nation, I think that a lot of people are looking at, that could probably change. So not today, not tomorrow, but in years to come.
Well, I've looked at some studies. There's a lot of potential out there. But we as a state are behind the Kentuckys and some of the other states, the Colorados, in terms of this.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to find our niche. We're going to have to use resources at the University of Nebraska plus our resources to kind of discover just where we can be competitive and where our farmers can make some money.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. So you're coming down at the end of your last term. What are you going to do after politics?
I'm going to find a beach. This is coming so fast and so hard.
Yeah.
Right now, I just want to stay focused on what I'm trying to get done now in the legislature to make it a successful career there. We still have some work to do. Property tax, obviously, is one of them.
Yeah.
As chair of appropriations, I'm going to try to do my best to hold down the spending so that it gives us opportunities. And hold down the spending is going to be a little tough because you do have Medicaid expansion. You do have a prison situation that still has a ways to go before we get it even close to in compliance. And right now, I think we're the highest in terms of overcrowding. Alabama and us seem to fight back and forth. So we've got some issues there to confront. Some challenges, certainly flood. We've got 51 million to fit into the budget situation this time. You know,
So you're not even thinking about what's on the other
no,
side of that yet?
I got a lot of stuff on my plate still. So, yeah, it's and hopefully, you know, the Heartland Expressway, that legislation got passed, so we can get that finished up, and if we get property tax resolved in some fashion, you know, it'd probably be okay.
Well, sir, you've been a huge advocate for the Western Nebraska citizens, and thought of very highly out here. So we thank you for everything that you've done for us, and you know, thank you for joining us on Table Talk today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you
bet.
very much.